An injured dog carrying a bag swims up to a boat to ask for help. But what happens next is nothing anyone could ever imagine. In the middle of a brutal storm, a tired river guide pulls the shaking German shepherd aboard. And inside that soaked red bag is something that changes everything. Suddenly, she realizes this dog didn't just show up. He escaped something. Something dangerous. Something someone tried to hide. As the storm grows worse, the boat rocks, and the dog keeps looking back toward the dark shoreline, almost begging her to follow. But when she radios for help, the people she trusts shut her down. And that's when she understands. She's not supposed to know the truth. Now she has to decide, turn back to safety, or follow the dog into a mystery that could cost her life. Because if this dog is right, and she makes the wrong choice, who's going to stop the disaster waiting upriver? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The Mississippi River churned beneath the tour boat like a living thing. Its waters dark and angry under the storm-blackened sky. Linnea Crowder gripped the wheel with white-knuckled hands, her eyes straining through the sheets of rain that battered the windshield. Behind her, the handful of passengers who'd insisted on taking the tour, despite her warnings, huddled together, their excited chatter from earlier now replaced by nervous murmurs. "Maybe we should turn back," called Mrs. Henderson, a grandmother who'd brought her 2 teenage grandchildren along. Her voice quivered with barely contained fear. "We're actually safer continuing forward," Linnea answered, keeping her voice steady and professional, despite the anxiety churning in her own stomach. "There's a dock ahead that'll give us better shelter than trying to turn around in this." A flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating the churning waters ahead. In that brief, brilliant moment, Linnea saw something that made her heart skip a beat. A dark shape in the water, moving against the current. She blinked, certain her eyes were playing tricks on her. But when another lightning flash came, she saw it clearly. A dog, struggling desperately against the river's fury. "Oh my God," she breathed, already turning the wheel. "There's a dog out there." "You can't be serious about stopping." This came from Mr. Peterson, a businessman who'd been complaining since the rain started. "It's just a stray. We need to get to safety." But Linnea was already easing the boat closer to the struggling animal. Her heart pounded as she got a better look. It was a German shepherd, and it was carrying something in its mouth. The dog's movements were becoming more labored, its head barely staying above water. "Jimmy," she called to the teenage boy, who'd been helping her with life jackets earlier. "Grab that rope and stand ready." The next few minutes were a blur of action. Linnea maneuvered the boat carefully, fighting both current and wind to get close enough without endangering the dog or her passengers. The German shepherd seemed to understand their intentions, swimming with renewed energy toward the boat. Jimmy managed to get the rope close enough for the dog to grab, but the animal wouldn't take it. Whatever was in its mouth, it refused to let go. "We're going to have to pull him in," Linnea decided, securing the wheel and moving to help. Water soaked through her rain jacket as she and Jimmy reached over the side. The dog's fur was slick under their hands, but together they managed to haul the exhausted animal aboard. The German shepherd collapsed on the deck, sides heaving, but still maintaining a death grip on what Linnea could now see was a red waterproof bag. The dog's amber eyes met hers with an intelligence that sent a shiver down her spine. Despite being clearly injured and exhausted, there was purpose in those eyes. "Easy there, boy," she murmured, kneeling beside the dog. "You're safe now." The German shepherd's ears perked forward at her voice, and to everyone's surprise, it immediately released the red bag, nudging it toward her with its nose. Linnea's hands trembled as she reached for it, feeling as though she was crossing some invisible threshold. The bag was the type used by hikers and outdoor enthusiasts to keep valuables dry, sealed tight against the elements. As she opened it, the first thing she pulled out was a stack of photographs, protected by plastic sleeves. They showed what appeared to be a dam, but not the familiar face of it. These photos were taken from unusual angles, showing hairline cracks and structural problems that made her breath catch. "What is it?" Jimmy asked, peering over her shoulder while the other passengers gathered around, their earlier fears temporarily forgotten in their curiosity. Linnea didn't answer. She'd just found a folded paper beneath the photos, and her world tilted sideways as she recognized the handwriting. How many times had she studied the few birthday cards she had left, tracing those precise engineer's letters with her fingers? The note was dated just 2 days ago. "To whoever receives this, the Marshall Dam is failing. Previous warnings have been ignored or suppressed. These photos show critical structural damage that has been hidden from inspectors. Without immediate action, thousands of lives downstream are at risk. Time is running out." The paper shook in her hands. Earl Crowder, her father, the man who'd vanished 15 years ago, leaving behind nothing but rumors of professional disgrace and failure. The man everyone believed was dead. The German shepherd whined softly and pressed against her leg, as if sensing her distress. Linnea noticed for the first time that the dog wore a worn leather collar with a single tag that read, "Ranger." "You know him, don't you?" she whispered to the dog. "You know my father." Ranger's tail thumped once against the deck in what seemed like confirmation. Another lightning flash illuminated the river, and Linnea felt the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. Her father was alive. He was trying to prevent a disaster. And somehow, this brave, injured dog had found her out of all people on the river. The photographs trembled in her hands as she looked through them again, her guide's knowledge of the river combining with what little she remembered of her father's engineering talks. The cracks he'd documented weren't small maintenance issues. They were signs of catastrophic failure waiting to happen. "Mrs. Henderson," she called out, her voice stronger now despite the storm around them. "Can I borrow your cell phone? Mine's in my locker, and we need to make some calls right now." The older woman handed over her phone without question, perhaps seeing something in Linnea's face that brooked no argument. Even Mr. Peterson remained silent as Linnea punched in numbers with shaking fingers, her other hand buried in Ranger's wet fur for strength. The storm continued to rage around their small boat, but Linnea barely noticed it anymore. Her world had shifted on its axis, transformed by a red bag and a brave dog who'd fought the Mississippi itself to deliver a message. Her father was alive. He was trying to prevent a disaster. And now, somehow, she had become part of whatever desperate race against time he'd set in motion. Ranger pressed closer against her leg, his warm presence a reminder that this was real, not some storm-induced hallucination. She had no idea what would come next, but she knew with absolute certainty that her life had just changed forever. The river had brought her a mystery, a mission, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to understand what had really happened to her father all those years ago. With trembling fingers, Linnea reached for the boat's radio handset. The plastic felt cold and slick in her grip as rain continued to pelt the small vessel. Ranger sat alert at her feet, his amber eyes watching her every move as if ensuring his mission would be completed. "River Guide Linnea Crowder to County Emergency Services, over." Her voice came out steadier than she expected, professional habits taking over despite her racing heart. After a crackle of static, a familiar drawl responded. "This is Sheriff Lane. What's your situation, Linnea?" She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "Sheriff, I've received urgent documentation about structural damage at Marshall Dam. Multiple photographs showing serious cracks and— "Now hold on just a minute," Sheriff Maddox Lane cut in, his tone already dismissive. "Where'd you get these supposed photos?" Linnea glanced down at Ranger, knowing how it would sound. "A messenger dog brought them to my boat. He's injured, but—" "A dog." The sheriff's laugh crackled through the radio. "You're calling emergency services about pictures delivered by a dog?" "The photos are signed by Earl Crowder, the former chief engineer. He's warning that the dam is at risk of imminent failure." Linnea tried to keep the defensive edge from her voice, but years of being patronized by local officials made it difficult. "Earl Crowder?" Another harsh laugh. "The same Earl Crowder who disappeared after that mess 15 years ago? The one who couldn't handle being fired?" Before Linnea could respond, another voice joined the radio conversation. "This is Colton Rigsby, Executive Director of Marshall Dam Operations. I couldn't help but overhear." Linnea's jaw tightened. Of course, the corporate suit would be monitoring emergency channels during the storm. "Miss Crowder," Rigsby's voice oozed fake concern, "I can assure you that Marshall Dam is completely stable. We conduct regular inspections and maintain the highest safety standards. These photos you claim to have, which I suspect you've staged for attention—" "Staged?" Linnea interrupted, her cheeks burning. "I'm on a tour boat in the middle of a storm. How exactly would I stage an injured German shepherd swimming through whitecaps with emergency documents?" "The dam's integrity is not in question," Rigsby continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "But filing false reports and causing public panic are serious offenses. I strongly suggest you drop this little performance." Mrs. Henderson, who had been listening nearby, touched Linnea's arm. "Dear, maybe we should head back. This storm's getting worse and everyone's a bit rattled." Indeed, the other passengers were huddled under the boat's canvas cover, shooting worried glances between the churning river and their guide, who seemed to be losing her grip on reality. "The dam is fine," Sheriff Lane's voice crackled again. "But if you're having trouble handling your tour in this weather, I can send a deputy to escort you back to dock." Linnea's fingers tightened around the radio, the same patronizing tone she'd heard her whole career on the river. Men in offices telling her she was overreacting, that her concerns weren't valid, that she should leave the important decisions to them. "With all due respect, Sheriff," she managed through gritted teeth, "these photos show serious structural compromises. If you'd just look at them—" "I'm done entertaining this nonsense," Rigsby cut in. "Sheriff, please note that Marshall Dam Corporation will pursue legal action if these false allegations cause any public disturbance." The radio fell silent, except for the hiss of rain-scattered static. Linnea stood frozen, the familiar feeling of helpless frustration washing over her. She'd spent years building her reputation as one of the most knowledgeable guides on this stretch of river, but one word from men like Rigsby and Lane could still dismiss her completely. "Miss Crowder?" Mr. Peterson spoke up from his seat. "I think we've all had enough excitement for one day. We should return to the dock." The other passengers nodded in agreement, their earlier sympathy replaced by nervous skepticism. To them, she probably looked like a woman coming unhinged, ranting about mystery dogs and conspiracy theories in the middle of a storm. But as Linnea looked down at Ranger, she saw nothing but steady purpose in those intelligent eyes. The dog had nearly drowned getting these documents to someone who could help. Her father, who she now knew was alive, had trusted this messenger with vital information. The photos in the red bag showed clear evidence of danger, regardless of what Rigsby claimed. Lightning split the sky again, closer this time, and thunder rolled across the water like a warning. The storm was intensifying, pushing more water into already swollen tributaries. If her father was right about the dam. Ranger stood up, shaking off river water, and moved to press against her leg. Despite his injuries, his posture was alert, expectant. This wasn't just a lost dog who'd stumbled onto her boat by chance. He was trying to guide her toward something, or someone. The weight of the red bag seemed to grow heavier in her hands. She could do what they wanted. Return to dock, hand over the documents to officials who would bury them, let herself be bullied into silence like so many times before. The safe choice. The expected choice. But her father's precise handwriting stared up at her from the warning note. Time is running out. Earl Crowder had been respected, brilliant, dedicated to his work. Whatever had happened 15 years ago, she couldn't believe he would risk his life and Rangers for a hoax. The radio crackled again. "This is Sheriff Lane. I'm sending Deputy Roberts to escort your boat back to Marina 3. Do you copy?" Linnea stared at the handset, feeling the familiar pressure to comply, to not make waves. But something deeper pulled at her now, an instinct honed by years on the river telling her that this was real, that lives depended on what she did next. Ranger whined softly, nudging her hand with his nose. In his eyes, she saw the same certainty she'd recognized in her father's handwriting. This wasn't a misdelivered package or a strange coincidence. This was a deliberate message, sent to her specifically, carrying a truth that powerful men wanted to keep hidden. The storm thundered overhead, and passengers shifted nervously in their seats, waiting for their guide to acknowledge the sheriff's orders. But Linnea's mind was already racing ahead, calculating risks and possibilities. She'd spent her life learning to read this river's moods and messages. Now it had brought her something she couldn't ignore, no matter how much the authorities insisted she should. The rain hammered against the tin roof of Boone Harker's riverside workshop, its steady drumming almost drowning out the worried voices on the marine radio. Linnea guided her rental car carefully down the muddy access road, Ranger sitting alertly in the passenger seat. The German Shepherd's amber eyes stayed fixed on the red bag in her lap, as if guarding it. Through the weather-streaked windshield, she could see light spilling from beneath the workshop's roll-up door. Even in the worst storms, Boone could usually be found here, methodically working on boat engines or dive equipment. The thought gave her a small measure of comfort. In all her years on the river, he was the only person who had consistently treated her expertise with respect. Linnea parked close to the building and turned to Ranger. "Ready, boy?" The dog's tail thumped against the seat once, decisively. Together they made a dash through the downpour to the workshop's side door. Before she could knock, it swung open, revealing Boone's broad-shouldered silhouette. His steady blue-gray eyes took in her rain-soaked appearance, then shifted to the German Shepherd at her side. "Linnea." His voice carried concern. "Heard some strange chatter on the radio about your tour today. I need your help, Boone, and I need you to look at something before you decide if I'm crazy." He stepped back, gesturing them inside. The workshop smelled of engine oil and river water, its walls lined with tools and salvaged mechanical parts. A partially dismantled outboard motor sat on the main workbench, forgotten for the moment. Ranger shook himself, scattering water droplets, then immediately began inspecting the space with focused attention. Boone watched the dog's deliberate movements. This wouldn't have anything to do with the dam accusations Rigsby was shouting about, would it? Linnea placed the red bag on a clear section of workbench. "My father sent these, Earl Crowder." Boone's expression sharpened. Like everyone else in the river community, he knew the story, how the respected engineer had vanished 15 years ago after a dispute with the Dam Corporation, leaving his family to face the whispers and judgment alone. "Earl's alive?" he asked quietly. "Apparently, and he's trying to warn us about something." Linnea began laying out the contents of the bag, photographs, technical diagrams, handwritten notes filled with calculations. Ranger brought these to my boat during the storm. Nearly drowned getting them to me. Boone picked up one of the photographs, studying it with the careful attention he gave to complicated engine repairs. His weathered features grew more serious as he examined image after image, occasionally referencing them against the diagrams. These show stress fractures in the primary spillway structure, he said finally, and if these measurements are accurate, he traced a line of Earl's calculations. The water pressure against the compromised sections is reaching critical levels. So I'm not imagining things? This is real? Very real. Boone's voice was grim. I've seen similar damage patterns in underwater structures, usually right before catastrophic failure. He looked up at her. The authorities dismissed this? Completely. Rigsby threatened legal action if I spread false allegations. The familiar frustration crept into her voice. They're sending a deputy to make sure I don't cause trouble. Before Boone could respond, Ranger let out a sharp whine. The dog had moved to the workshop's rear door, the one that opened onto the maze of backwater channels. He paced back and forth, looking at Linnea with urgent intensity. He's been doing this since I got him dried off, she explained. It's like he's trying to lead us somewhere. You think Earl trained him to guide someone to a specific location? I'm certain of it. Dad was brilliant with animals. He could teach them incredibly complex tasks. Linnea watched Ranger's determined movements. This isn't random behavior. He knows exactly where he needs to take us. Boone was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving between the diagrams, the anxious dog, and Linnea's face. She knew he was weighing the risks. Going against Rigsby and the sheriff would have serious consequences, especially for someone like Boone, who preferred to keep a low profile. Finally, he straightened up. Give me 5 minutes to prep the small skiff. The backwater channels will be safer than the main river in this weather. Relief flooded through Linnea. You believe me? I believe the evidence, and I believe in your judgment. He began gathering emergency gear with quick efficiency. Besides, I've never trusted Rigsby. Man cares more about profit margins than public safety. Ranger's tail wagged as Boone pulled out rain gear and life vests. The dog seemed to sense they'd made the right choice. We'll be going directly against the sheriff's orders, Linnea warned. This could cost you business, maybe worse. Boone paused in his preparations, meeting her eyes. Some things matter more than keeping your head down. If Earl Crowder risked breaking his 15 years of silence to send these warnings, we owe it to him, and everyone downstream, to find out why. He resumed his methodical packing, adding emergency flares and first aid supplies to a waterproof bag. Besides, he added with a slight smile, someone needs to watch your back when you decide to take on the powers that be. The rain intensified outside, but Ranger's excitement was building. The dog moved between them as they worked, his earlier exhaustion forgotten in the anticipation of completing his mission. Within minutes, Boone had the small skiff ready. Its shallow draft would let them navigate the narrow backwater channels, while the quiet electric motor would draw less attention than a standard outboard. He'd added extra fuel cells, emergency supplies, and powerful flashlights. Ready? He asked, zipping up his rain gear. Linnea nodded, double-checking the waterproof case where she'd stored Earl's documents. Ranger was already waiting expectantly by the boat. Thank you, she said softly, for believing me, for helping. You've never steered me wrong about river matters before. Boone's voice was matter-of-fact as he did a final equipment check. And whatever we find out there, better to face it together than let you go alone? The workshop door rolled up, revealing sheets of rain and the dark maze of backwater channels beyond. Ranger jumped into the skiff without hesitation, taking up position in the bow like he'd done it 100 times before. As Linnea and Boone joined him, she felt a surge of determination replace her earlier uncertainty. Her father was out there somewhere, trying to prevent a disaster. With Boone's help and Ranger's guidance, she would find him, no matter what obstacles Rigsby and his allies put in their way. The small skiff sliced through the churning water, guided by Ranger's unwavering focus. Rain pelted them from above as Boone carefully navigated between half-submerged logs and debris swept up by the storm. The backwater channels were a maze of narrow passages between the main river and higher ground, made even more treacherous by the weather. Linnea kept her eyes on Ranger, who stood alert in the bow. Every time they reached a junction, the German shepherd would lean distinctly in one direction, his amber eyes fixed on some destination only he could see. There was no hesitation in his movements. This was a path he knew well. "Your father chose these routes carefully," Boone observed, throttling back to avoid a tangle of branches. "These channels are off most navigation charts, perfect for moving undetected." "Dad always said the river had secret paths," Linnea replied, ducking under a low-hanging willow. "I never realized he meant it literally." A massive log suddenly lurched into their path, driven by a surge of floodwater. Boone cut the motor hard to port, and Linnea grabbed the gunwale as they swerved. The skiff's hull scraped past with inches to spare. "Sorry about that," Boone said, his hands steady on the tiller. "Storm's pushing everything downstream. We need to stay sharp." Ranger hadn't flinched during the near miss. If anything, his posture grew more intent as they pressed deeper into the maze of channels. The rain was coming down in sheets now, reducing visibility to mere yards ahead. After another 15 minutes of careful navigation, Ranger's ears pricked forward. He gave a short bark, his first vocalization since they'd set out. "He sees something," Linnea said, wiping rain from her eyes. Through the gray curtain of water, a dark shape gradually emerged, a small structure perched on stilts above the flood level. "That must be it," Boone said quietly. "Your father's monitoring station." As they drew closer, Linnea's heart sank. The wooden shack was a wreck. One wall was blackened by fire, and the door hung crookedly on its hinges. Broken glass from the windows littered the small deck that wrapped around the building. Boone tied off at the listing dock while Linnea helped Ranger aboard. The dog immediately headed for the door, waiting impatiently as they approached. "This wasn't storm damage," Boone said, examining the scorched wall. "Someone tried to burn this place down. Recently, too, maybe within the last week." Linnea felt sick. They knew Dad was gathering evidence against them. Inside, the destruction was even worse. File cabinets had been emptied, their contents torn and scattered. A desk lay overturned, its drawers smashed. Weather equipment lay in pieces, and the walls were stripped of anything that might have held data. "They were thorough," Boone said grimly, "looking for exactly what your father sent you." But Ranger wasn't interested in the vandalized interior. He padded straight through to the back of the shack, where a crude trap door led to the space beneath. The dog scratched at the wood insistently. Together they lifted the heavy door. A ladder descended into darkness. Boone clicked on his flashlight, revealing a small storage space beneath the shack. Water had seeped in, leaving several inches of muddy floodwater on the floor. Ranger splashed down without hesitation, making his way to what looked like a storm drain outlet in the concrete foundation. The dog began pawing at a specific spot near the drain's metal grate. "There's something here," Linnea said, kneeling in the water. Her fingers found a loose section of concrete that shifted under pressure. With Boone's help, they managed to work it free, revealing a watertight metal container wedged into a hidden cavity. "Smart," Boone muttered. "They searched everything above, but never thought to check the foundation itself." The container was heavy and sealed tight. They carried it back up to the shack's main room, where Boone used tools from his kit to carefully pry it open. Inside, protected from both water and fire, lay a thick stack of technical documents. Linnea's hands trembled as she began sorting through the papers. There were detailed engineering schematics of the dam's pressure control systems, maintenance logs spanning years, and photographs documenting unauthorized modifications to key safety equipment. "Look at this," she said, holding up several pages of handwritten notes. "Dad recorded everything. Rigsby's company deliberately welded shut relief valves to maintain higher water levels. They were trying to maximize power generation, but it means there's no way to safely release pressure when the reservoir gets too full." Boone studied the documents with growing concern. These modifications completely override the dam's safety systems. Once the water reaches a certain level, there's no way to prevent catastrophic failure. He looked up at Linnea. "Your father wasn't warning about a potential accident. He was documenting deliberate sabotage." "They're going to kill people," Linnea whispered. "All those towns downstream. They won't have a chance when the dam goes." A crack of thunder made them both jump. The storm was getting worse, and with it, the pressure on those compromised systems was building by the hour. Ranger whined softly, pressing against Linnea's leg. His mission wasn't complete. He had more to show them. But now they understood the true stakes. This wasn't just about exposing corporate negligence. They were racing against time to prevent an engineered disaster that would destroy countless lives. Carefully, they sealed the documents in Boone's waterproof bag. The evidence was clear and damning. Proof of criminal disregard for human life in the name of profit. But having proof and being able to act on it in time were two very different things. "We need to keep moving," Boone said, checking his watch. "That dog of yours still has somewhere to take us." Linnea nodded, giving Ranger a gentle pat. "Lead on, boy. Take us to Dad." They made their way back to the skiff, leaving the vandalized shack behind. The rain continued to pour, but now each drop carried the weight of their discovery. Somewhere ahead, through these hidden channels, Earl Crowder was waiting, a man who had sacrificed everything to expose the truth. And time was running out to make that sacrifice mean something. Linnea stared at the damning evidence spread across the skiff's small console, her mind racing to process the horrifying implications. The rain drummed steadily on the boat's canvas top as Boone held his flashlight over the technical diagrams. "Those welded valves," she said, tracing the modified sections with a shaking finger. "They're designed to release pressure when the water gets too high, right?" Boone nodded grimly. "And with them sealed shut, there's no way for the dam to handle the surge from this storm. It's like corking a shaken bottle. Eventually, something has to give." "How many people live downstream?" Linnea's voice cracked. "Thousands. Riverton's the closest, but then there's Mason Creek, Stillwater." Boone's weathered face was drawn with concern. "If that dam fails, they'll have minutes, maybe less." Linnea grabbed her satellite phone, but the screen showed only a weak signal. She dialed the Army Corps of Engineers anyway, holding the device up toward the storm-dark sky. Come on," she muttered, as static crackled through the speaker. Finally, a voice broke through, fragmented but audible. "Corps of Engineers Emergency Line." "Listen carefully," Linnea said urgently. "I'm reporting critical tampering at Cascade Dam. The pressure relief valves have been deliberately disabled." The signal dissolved into static. Linnea swore, trying to reposition the phone. When the connection stabilized, a different voice came through. "This is Deputy Marshal. Got a report you're spreading panic about the dam again, Miss Crowder." Linnea's heart sank. The sheriff's department had intercepted the call. You don't understand. We have proof. Sheriff Lane wants you to cease and desist immediately. Turn your boat around and report to the station, or we'll have to take action. The line went dead. Linnea looked at Boone, who had already started the engine. They're not going to let us warn anyone, she said. No, Boone agreed, checking the fuel gauge. And we've got maybe 2 hours before those deputies start searching these channels. Ranger whined from his spot near the bow, ears pricked toward the distant dam. The dog's mission wasn't finished. Whatever Earl wanted them to see was still ahead. We have to go forward, Linnea said firmly. Dad wouldn't have sent these documents if there wasn't a way to stop this. Boone studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Which channel? Linnea turned to Ranger. Show us, boy. The German Shepherd immediately moved to the starboard side, focusing intently on a narrow waterway that branched north. Boone guided the skiff into the passage, cutting the engine to a low idle to avoid drawing attention. The channel twisted through a maze of partially submerged trees. Linnea used her guide's pole to push away debris while scanning for patrol boats. The rain had intensified, reducing visibility to a few dozen yards. Her radio crackled. Attention all vessels. This is Sheriff Lane. We have reports of individuals spreading false information about Cascade Dam. Anyone encountered on the water is to be directed to shore immediately. False information, Linnea muttered bitterly. People are going to die because of their lies. They're scared, Boone said, navigating around a half-submerged log. Once that dam goes, everyone will know they ignored the warnings. Their careers, their freedom, it'll all be gone. A distant engine sound made them both freeze. Boone quickly steered into a curtain of hanging willows, cutting power. Moments later, a patrol boat cruised past their hiding spot, searchlight sweeping the channel. All units be advised, the radio crackled again. Linnea Crowder was last seen heading north in a small craft. Subject is to be detained for questioning regarding criminal mischief and inciting public panic. Consider her dangerous. Dangerous? Linnea's laugh held no humor. They're the ones endangering thousands of lives. They're trying to stop us from reaching the dam, Boone said quietly. Which means there might still be something we can do when we get there. More engine sounds approached, at least 2 boats, moving methodically up and down the channels. They were searching in a grid pattern, closing in on their location. Ranger suddenly stood alert, tail rigid. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Multiple boats approaching your position, the radio warned. Box them in if possible. Linnea's mind raced. They were running out of time, and now law enforcement was actively hunting them. The dam was still miles away through these winding channels. If they were caught... We can't let them stop us, she said. Not with so many lives at stake. Boone's expression was grim but determined. I know these backwaters better than any deputy, but if we run, we're officially fugitives. We're already accused of crimes we didn't commit, Linnea pointed out. At least this way we might prevent a real one. The search boats were getting closer. Soon, the deputies would begin checking the willow curtains and hidden inlets. They had to move. Ranger paced anxiously between them, clearly understanding the danger but still focused on his mission. Whatever Earl had discovered, whatever he needed them to see, it was worth all this risk. Hold tight, Boone said, his hand on the throttle. This is going to get rough. He gunned the engine, bursting out of the willows just as a searchlight swept past. Shouts of surprise echoed across the water as their small craft shot into the main channel. Stop immediately, a amplified voice commanded. This is your only warning. But Boone was already turning hard into a narrow side channel, one barely wide enough for their skiff. Behind them, the larger patrol boats struggled to follow, their wider hulls scraping against the banks. They'll radio ahead, Linnea said, bracing herself as they took another sharp turn. Set up roadblocks. Let them try, Boone replied grimly. These channels are like a maze in the dark, and we've got something they don't. He glanced at Ranger, who stood absolutely steady despite the boat's wild maneuvers, nose pointed unerringly toward their destination. The sound of pursuit faded as Boone navigated a complex series of turns, doubling back and crossing their own wake to confuse their trail. The rain helped, muffling their engine noise and reducing visibility for their pursuers, but they couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, they would have to make a break for the dam. And now they would be doing it as fugitives, with every law enforcement officer in the county looking for them. Linnea clutched her father's documents, knowing they held both proof of corporate crimes and perhaps the key to preventing disaster. But first, they had to reach their destination, and Ranger's determined focus told her they still had a way to go. The dog suddenly barked, a sharp, urgent sound. Boone immediately cut power, drifting to a stop. Moments later, a patrol boat crossed the channel ahead, its searchlight sweeping back and forth. They waited in tense silence until it passed. This was their new reality, wanted by the law for trying to prevent a catastrophe. The irony would have been funny if thousands of lives weren't at stake. "Ready?" Boone asked quietly, hand on the throttle. Linnea nodded, her jaw set with determination. They had the truth. They had Earl's evidence, and they had Ranger's unwavering guidance. It would have to be enough. The skiff eased forward, picking up speed as they resumed their desperate race against time, nature, and now the law itself. The radio crackled with urgent voices as more patrol boats joined the search. Through the darkness and rain, Linnea could make out the distinctive blue and red emergency lights reflecting off the churning water. At least 3 vessels were converging on their position, cutting off escape routes one by one. Last chance. "Crowder!" Sheriff Lane's voice boomed across the water. "Stop your boat now and come in peacefully." Linnea's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The small skiff bobbed violently in the wake of the approaching patrol boats. Beside her, Boone braced himself against the gunwale, his eyes scanning the tree line for any possible escape route. Ranger crouched low in the boat, his wet fur bristling as he sensed the mounting tension. There, Boone pointed toward a barely visible gap in the partially submerged forest. "That old logging trail. It'll be tight, but they won't be able to follow with their bigger boats," Linnea finished, already turning the wheel hard to port. The skiff's bow sliced through the murky water as she opened up the throttle. "Stop immediately!" The sheriff's voice grew more urgent. "You're heading into a dangerous area." Linnea almost laughed at that, as if she didn't know these waters like the back of her hand. She'd been navigating these back channels since she was old enough to hold a tiller. Still, even she had to admit this was pushing the limits of safety. The storm had transformed familiar routes into obstacle courses of broken trees and floating debris. The skiff shot into the narrow channel between the trees. Immediately, the outside world seemed to vanish. The patrol boat's searchlights couldn't penetrate the thick canopy above. They were in a tunnel of shadows and rain, with only their small bow light to illuminate the hazards ahead. "Watch the port side," Boone called out, grabbing a boat hook to fend off an approaching log. The wooden pole shuddered in his hands as he pushed away the massive piece of driftwood. "These old trails are bad enough in good weather." Linnea didn't respond, too focused on threading their way through the obstacle course ahead. A partially submerged tree forced her to cut the throttle and slide sideways through a gap barely wider than their beam. Behind them, she could hear the frustrated shouts of the deputies as they realized their larger boats couldn't follow. But they weren't in the clear yet. The storm had turned this usually peaceful backwater into a maze of deadly hazards. Every few seconds, Linnea had to adjust their course to avoid another threat. Here a cluster of broken branches reaching like claws from the water. There a section of someone's dock torn free by the rising water. Ranger stayed absolutely still, somehow maintaining his balance despite the wild maneuvers. His ears were pricked forward, as if he could sense the safest path through this chaos. Given everything else they'd learned about Earl's messenger, Linnea wouldn't have been surprised if he could. A massive crack split the air above them. Linnea looked up just in time to see a huge branch, weakened by the storm, breaking free from its trunk. "Hold on!" she screamed, throwing the wheel hard over. The skiff heeled sharply, nearly throwing them all into the water. The branch crashed down exactly where they'd been moments before, sending up a wall of spray. "They're trying to cut around through the main channel," Boone shouted, hearing the distant roar of engines. "They'll catch us if we don't." His warning was cut short by a violent impact that slammed him forward against the console. A submerged tree trunk had caught their stern, spinning them sideways. Ranger yelped, scrabbling for purchase on the wet deck as the boat tilted dangerously. Water poured over the gunwale. Linnea fought the wheel, trying to straighten their course before they capsized. The engine screamed as the propeller cleared the water, then caught again with a shuddering bang. Every instinct told her to cut power, to play it safe, but she knew that would mean capture. Instead, she pushed the throttle further forward. "Are you crazy?" Boone yelled, but there was admiration mixed with the fear in his voice. He grabbed Ranger's collar with one hand to steady the dog, while using the boat hook to push them away from a tangle of flood-carried debris. The skiff shot forward, engine howling in protest. Linnea's world narrowed to a tunnel of concentration. See the hazard, judge the gap, make the turn, again and again with no room for error. Her arms ached from fighting the wheel, but she couldn't let up. Not now. Not with so much at stake. They burst out of the forest trail into a slightly wider channel. For a moment, Linnea thought they might have lost their pursuers. Then she heard the rumble of engines approaching from both directions. The deputies had indeed cut around, trying to box them in. "There!" Boone pointed to their left. A massive collection of storm debris had collected in a natural bottleneck. Trees, pieces of docks, even what looked like a small shed. It formed a precarious dam of its own, with water rushing through the gaps. Linnea saw his plan immediately. It was possibly the worst idea she'd ever heard, which made it perfect for their situation. She turned the boat toward the debris field, ignoring every safety rule she'd ever learned about river navigation. "They're going to try to run the blockage," she heard a deputy shout through the radio. "No way their boat can make it through that." But Linnea had seen something they hadn't. A narrow gap near the bottom of the pile, where the water ran fast and clear. It would be tight, maybe impossibly so, but it was their only chance. "If this doesn't work," Boone said, wrapping one arm around Ranger and bracing himself, "I want you to know." "Tell me later." Linnea cut him off, unable to deal with goodbyes right now. She needed all her focus for what came next. The skiff shot toward the gap like an arrow. Linnea waited until the last possible second, then cut power and turned the wheel hard over. The current caught them, pulling them into the narrow channel. Branches scraped against the hull with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The boat tilted, caught between the force of the water and the weight of the debris above. For one terrible moment, they were stuck. Water began pouring in over the stern. Then something shifted in the debris pile, and they shot forward like a cork from a bottle. Behind them, they heard a tremendous crash as the passage collapsed completely. The deputy boats had to stop. There was no way through the blockage now, and it would take them precious time to find another route around. Linnea allowed herself a small smile as she heard their frustrated calls fading into the distance. They'd done it. They'd escaped. But they had no time to celebrate. The dam still waited ahead, and now they were officially fugitives. The real challenge was just beginning. That, Boone said, shaking water from his hair, was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. Probably both, Linnea admitted, finally allowing herself to breathe normally again. She reached down to pat Ranger, who seemed completely unfazed by their wild ride. But we didn't have much choice. The dog's tail wagged once, as if agreeing with her assessment. Then he turned to face forward again, his posture making it clear their journey wasn't over yet. The maintenance entrance stood nearly invisible against the dam's massive concrete face, disguised by years of weathering and deliberate camouflage. Linnea might have missed it entirely if Ranger hadn't led them straight to it. The dog's wet nose pressed against a section of wall that looked exactly like every other section, except for a hairline crack that formed the outline of a door. "Someone's been using this recently," Boone observed, pointing to fresh scrapes in the rust around the handle. He pulled a flashlight from his belt and shined it at the lock. And not through the front door either. Linnea's hands shook as she examined the entrance. After all these years of wondering, of hurt and anger about her father's disappearance, she felt something shift inside her. There had always been more to the story. She'd known it in her heart, even when everyone else said Earl had simply walked away from his responsibilities. Ranger whined urgently, pawing at the door. The rising water swirled around their knees, making every second count. "Stand back," Boone said, producing a small toolkit from his jacket. Within minutes, he had the lock open. The door creaked inward, revealing a dark corridor that disappeared into the heart of the dam. Water trickled down the walls, and their flashlight beams caught the gleam of wet pipes overhead. The air felt thick with moisture, and the musty smell of enclosed spaces. Their footsteps echoed off concrete walls as they made their way deeper inside, following Ranger's determined lead. "Dad?" Linnea called out, her voice bouncing back at her. "Earl Crowder?" A weak cough answered from somewhere ahead, followed by a strained voice. "Linnea? Is that really you?" Her heart leaped into her throat. She knew that voice, even after all these years. Ranger bounded ahead, leading them around a corner and into what appeared to be some kind of maintenance room. Their flashlights revealed a scene that made Linnea's blood run cold. Earl Crowder lay trapped beneath a fallen section of heavy equipment, what looked like part of an old control panel that had torn loose from the wall. His face was pale and drawn with pain, but his eyes lit up at the sight of his daughter. "You came," he whispered. "I wasn't sure you would understand the message." Linnea rushed forward, splashing through the ankle-deep water to reach him. Up close, she could see the toll the years had taken. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and deep lines marked his face. But his eyes were exactly as she remembered them, bright with intelligence and determination. "Why?" The word burst from her before she could stop it, carrying years of hurt. "Why did you disappear? Why didn't you tell me what was happening?" Earl winced, both from pain and from the accusation in her voice. "I tried to fight it the right way first, through channels, with paperwork and reports. But Rigsby, he had everything locked down. Every inspection rigged, every report altered. When I refused to sign off on their falsified safety documents, they didn't just fire me, they buried me." Boone was already examining the equipment pinning Earl. "We need to get this off him. Linnea, grab that pipe for leverage." As they worked to free Earl, he continued speaking, his voice strained. "Rigsby's people made sure no one would believe me. They planted evidence that I had been taking bribes, doctored photographs, created a paper trail that made me look unstable and unreliable. When I tried to go public, they threatened you and your mother." The equipment shifted slightly as they pried at it. Earl gasped in pain but kept talking, as if he couldn't stop now that he'd finally started explaining. "I knew I couldn't just walk away. Not with what I knew about the dam. They'd welded shut critical safety valves to maintain higher water levels. More water meant more power generation, more profit. But it also meant the dam couldn't release pressure properly during major storms. Ranger stood guard nearby, occasionally whining when water splashed too close to Earl. Linnea noticed the dog's protective stance and suddenly understood something else. "You trained him," she said. "You've been using him to carry messages when you couldn't move freely yourself." Earl nodded, managing a small smile despite his pain. "Ranger's been my lifeline. When I realized they were watching all official channels, monitoring emails and phone calls, I needed another way. He's smart, smarter than most humans I know. He can navigate the backwater trails better than any boat." With a final heave, they managed to lift the equipment enough for Earl to slide free. He tried to stand but stumbled, caught by both Linnea and Boone. "You've been here all this time," Linnea said, her voice thick with emotion. "Watching the dam, gathering evidence, trying to warn people." "Living in hidden places," Earl confirmed, "using old maintenance tunnels and forgotten access points. I couldn't leave, not when I knew what could happen. But I couldn't reach out to you either, not without putting you in danger." The revelation hit Linnea like a physical blow. All those years she'd spent feeling abandoned, feeling like she hadn't been important enough for her father to stay. And he'd been here, fighting a lonely battle against forces that had been determined to silence him. "The system was rigged against us from the start, wasn't it?" she said quietly. "Just like it's been rigged against me every time I tried to warn them about problems on the river." Earl's eyes filled with pain that had nothing to do with his injuries. "I'm so sorry, Linnea. I never wanted this life for you. I thought by staying away I could protect you from it all. Instead, you've been fighting the same battles I was, just in a different way." Water continued rising around their feet, reminding them of the immediate danger. But for just a moment, Linnea held onto her father's hand, feeling the years of separation and misunderstanding begin to heal. "We need to move," Boone said gently, breaking the moment. "This place isn't safe, and that water's rising fast." Earl nodded, leaning heavily on them both. "There's more you need to know. Rigsby, he's not just negligent, he's actively dangerous. When he realized people might start asking questions about the dam's condition, A sudden rumble shook the corridor, cutting off Earl's words. Ranger barked sharply, his hackles rising. The sound of rushing water grew louder, more threatening. The time for explanations was over. Now they had to survive. The rising water sloshed around their ankles as they made their way deeper into the dam's maintenance corridors. Earl leaned heavily on Linnea's shoulder, his breath coming in short gasps, while Boone led the way with a flashlight. Ranger padded alongside Earl, staying close as if sensing his weakness. "The main control room is ahead," Earl said, pointing down a branching hallway. "But the critical spillway controls are mechanical backups, designed to work even if power fails. They're through that door on the left." The metal door creaked open to reveal a cramped room filled with pipes, gauges, and large wheel-shaped valves mounted on the walls. The sound of rushing water was louder here, creating an ominous background rumble. "These haven't been maintained properly in years," Earl said, shaking his head as he examined the nearest valve. "They're supposed to be checked monthly, but look at this rust." Boone ran his hands over one of the wheel valves, his experienced fingers testing its movement. "Seized up pretty bad, but not welded. We might be able to break it free." "Start with the northwestern spillway," Earl instructed, easing himself down onto a metal storage box. "That's the one under the most pressure right now. Linnea, watch that gauge there. The red one. It needs to drop below 75%. Linnea positioned herself by the pressure gauge while Boone gripped the wheel valve. The metal groaned in protest as he applied force, his muscles straining against years of neglect. "Come on," Boone muttered through gritted teeth. "Give way, you stubborn piece of—" With a sharp crack, the valve broke free. Boone nearly lost his balance but recovered quickly, beginning to turn the wheel with steadier movements. Above them, they could hear the deep rumble of water beginning to move through the spillway. "The gauge is responding," Linnea called out, watching the needle quiver and slowly begin to drop. "Down to 88%, 85%. Earl fumbled with the radio he'd kept hidden in his jacket. "Try to raise someone again. The storm might have cleared enough for a signal." Linnea took the radio, adjusting frequencies while Boone continued working the valve. Static filled the small room, broken occasionally by fragments of voices. She kept trying, her voice steady and professional despite the urgency of their situation. "This is Linnea Crowder at Marshall Dam. We have a critical situation. Is anyone receiving?" More static. Then suddenly a clear voice broke through. "This is Army Corps Engineer Phillips. We're receiving you." Relief flooded through Linnea, but she kept her voice controlled. "We're with Earl Crowder." "Earl Crowder?" The engineer's voice sharpened with recognition. "The structural engineer who filed reports about safety violations 3 years ago?" "Yes," Linnea confirmed, watching her father's face tighten with emotion. "He's here with us. The dam is under severe pressure from the storm, and we've found evidence of deliberately tampered safety systems." "We've been trying to investigate those old reports," Phillips said, his tone serious. "But we kept hitting roadblocks. What's your situation now?" While Linnea relayed their status, Boone moved to the second valve. This one broke free more easily, and soon they had 2 spillways working to relieve the pressure. 78%, Linnea reported, watching the gauge. "Still dropping." Earl managed a weak smile. "It's working. If we can get it below 70%, the dam structure should hold even with the storm." Ranger, who had been quietly watching from Earl's side, suddenly lifted his head and gave a low whine. His ears twitched, tracking some sound they couldn't yet hear. "What's the dog hearing?" Boone asked, pausing in his work. Before anyone could answer, their radio crackled again. "Marshall Dam Team, this is Phillips. We've got helicopters en route with emergency response teams. ETA 45 minutes. Can you hold position until then?" "The pressure's still dropping," Linnea reported, but she noticed something else, a vibration in the floor that seemed to be getting stronger. "Dad? What's that?" Earl's face had gone pale. "The lower maintenance tunnel. It's not just the spillways they tampered with. Rigsby had them modify the foundation drainage system. If that gives way—" A deep, grinding sound cut through their conversation, followed by the sharp crack of concrete under stress. Ranger barked, moving closer to Earl protectively. "Keep working those valves," Earl ordered, his voice stronger despite his injuries. "Every bit of pressure we can relieve might make the difference." Boone attacked the third valve with renewed determination, while Linnea divided her attention between the gauge and the radio, maintaining contact with Engineer Phillips. The pressure reading continued to drop, 76%, 74%, 72%, but the vibrations in the floor were getting worse. 69%, Linnea called out. "We're below 70%. For a moment, hope surged through the room. The gauge continued its slow but steady descent, and the violent shaking seemed to decrease slightly. Through the radio, they could hear Phillips coordinating with emergency teams, mobilizing resources they'd been denied for years. "The corporate inspection records are being seized right now," Phillips informed them. "We've got enough probable cause from your evidence to move in. Rigsby and his board are going to have a lot of questions to answer." Earl closed his eyes briefly, years of vindication washing over his face. "It wasn't for nothing," he murmured. "All of it. It wasn't for nothing." Linnea squeezed her father's shoulder, understanding flowing between them. This moment of victory, however small, represented everything they'd both fought for. The truth finally breaking through years of corruption and denial. "Pressure's at 65%, she reported, allowing herself to feel the first real hope since the storm began. "The structure's stabilizing. We might actually save this thing." Boone stepped back from the valves, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Never thought I'd be glad to see government helicopters heading our way," he said with a slight smile. "Think they'll believe us this time?" "They'd better," Linnea replied, thinking of all the evidence in the red bag, all her father's careful documentation. "We've got proof they can't ignore anymore." The radio crackled again with Phillips's voice. "Marshall Dam Team, maintain your position if safe. First response units are 25 minutes out. State engineers are reviewing your pressure data in real time. Keep those spillways open." They had done it. They had actually done it. The pressure was dropping, help was on the way, and for the first time in years, someone in authority was actually listening. Linnea looked at her father, saw the tears in his eyes, and understood exactly how he felt. After so long being dismissed, being treated as troublemakers or attention seekers, they had finally broken through. Ranger wagged his tail slowly, seeming to sense the change in mood. He pressed against Earl's leg, and Earl scratched behind his ears. "Good boy," he murmured. "You did it. You got the message through." The moment of triumph shattered as a deep, thunderous groan echoed through the dam's structure. The sound was like nothing Linnea had ever heard before, primal and terrifying, as if the earth itself was splitting apart. "That's not good," Boone said, his voice tight with tension. Before anyone could move, a deafening crack split the air. The concrete sidewall to their right erupted in a spray of fragments and pressurized water. The breach started small, a spiderweb of cracks spreading outward, but within seconds, entire sections of the wall began to give way. "Boone, get back!" Linnea screamed as the first surge of water crashed into the gallery. The wave caught Boone mid-turn, sweeping his feet out from under him. He slammed against the control panel, fingers desperately grasping for any hold as the torrent tried to drag him toward the rapidly widening breach. "The emergency ladder!" Earl shouted from where he lay pinned. "Linnea, get to him. Use the support beam as an anchor." Linnea's river guide instincts kicked in. She wrapped one arm around the steel support beam, stretching her body out toward Boone. The icy water pulled at her legs, threatening to tear her grip loose. "Grab my hand!" she yelled over the roar of the water. Boone fought against the current, his fingers reaching for hers. Their hands met, slipped, then locked together. Linnea's shoulders screamed in protest as she pulled with everything she had, dragging him toward the beam. "I've got you," she gasped, as Boone finally got his own grip on the support. "I've got you." A sharp yelp of pain cut through the chaos. Ranger, who had been staying close to Earl, was thrown across the gallery by another surge. The German shepherd's body slammed hard into a metal bulkhead, and he crumpled to the floor with a whimper that tore at Linnea's heart. "Ranger," Earl called out, trying to reach toward the injured dog despite his own trapped position. "Here, boy, come here." The water level was rising rapidly now, already knee-deep and climbing. The gauges that had shown such promising numbers minutes before were now spinning wildly, their readings meaningless as the dam's structure continued to fail. "The pressure relief. It was all for nothing," Linnea said, the weight of defeat crushing down on her chest. "No," Earl's voice cut through her despair. "We bought time. Those helicopters are still coming, but right now we need to focus on surviving the next few minutes." Boone pulled himself along the beam toward the higher ground near Earl. "He's right. We're not done yet." Ranger had managed to get back to his feet, limping but determined as he made his way back to Earl's side. The dog's fur was soaked, but his eyes remained alert, watching them all as if waiting for direction. The radio crackled through the sound of rushing water. "Marshall Dam Team, we're picking up massive structural anomalies on the sensors. What's your status? Report immediately." Linnea fought her way to the radio, water now at her waist. "Breach in the lower gallery. We've got water coming in fast. The sidewall is failing." "Can you evacuate? There's a secondary access tunnel on your level that should still be clear." Another violent shudder ran through the dam. More cracks appeared in the ceiling, water now spraying from multiple points. The original breach continued to widen, chunks of concrete breaking free and being swept away by the current. "If we don't move now, we'll be trapped," Boone shouted, already working his way toward Earl. "This whole section could go any minute." Linnea looked at her father, still pinned under the fallen equipment. The water was rising toward him now, and fear gripped her heart. They had just found each other again. She couldn't lose him now. "Dad," she started, but Earl cut her off. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice steady despite everything. "That equipment shifted when the wall broke. There might be enough give now to pull me free, but we have to do it fast." Boone was already examining the metal beams trapping Earl. "He's right. The water actually moved some of it. If we work together?" Another tremor shook the gallery. More water poured in, the current growing stronger with each passing second. Ranger barked urgently, as if understanding the desperate nature of their situation. "The structural integrity is failing faster than predicted," the radio warned. "You need to get out of there now." The water was chest deep on Linnea now, as she fought her way to her father's side. Together she and Boone braced themselves against the current, gripping the twisted metal that held Earl captive. "On 3, Boone said, his eyes meeting Linnea's. 1, 2, 3. They pulled with everything they had, muscles straining against the weight of the debris and the force of the water. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding screech of metal on concrete, the equipment shifted just enough. Earl cried out in pain but managed to drag himself free. His legs were badly injured, but he was alive and mobile. "We've got to move!" Linnea shouted, as another section of wall began to buckle. "Which way to that secondary tunnel?" Earl pointed toward a dark opening partially hidden behind a control panel. "Through there. It leads up to the emergency exit." Ranger was already moving in that direction, as if he knew exactly where they needed to go. Despite his injury, the dog's instincts remained sharp, his purpose clear. The water continued to rise, now reaching their shoulders. The current threatened to sweep them off their feet with each step. Boone took one of Earl's arms, while Linnea took the other, supporting him as they fought their way toward the tunnel entrance. The dam groaned again, the sound now almost constant. Pieces of the ceiling were coming down, splashing into the churning, water around them. The destruction was accelerating, the entire structure seemingly coming apart at the seams. "Almost there," Boone encouraged as they reached the tunnel entrance. "Just a little further." Behind them, the gallery was now almost completely submerged. The breach that had started it all was no longer visible beneath the water's surface, but they could feel its effect in the powerful current that pulled at their bodies. They had reached the tunnel, but their ordeal was far from over. The water was still rising, the dam was still failing, and they were trapped in the heart of it all. Everything they had worked for, every small victory they had achieved, seemed to be washing away in the flood. But they were together. They were alive. And as long as that remained true, they would keep fighting. Ranger stood at the tunnel entrance, his amber eyes fixed on them, waiting to guide them through whatever came next. Despite his injuries, despite the chaos around them, the dog remained focused on his mission, just as they all needed to be. The radio sparked and died, their last connection to the outside world lost to the rising water. Now it was just the 4 of them, facing whatever the next moments would bring, as the dam continued to groan and shudder around them. Through the chaos of rushing water and crumbling concrete, flashlight beams suddenly cut through the darkness. Colton Rigsby emerged from an upper maintenance passage, flanked by 4 burly men in security uniforms. Their presence felt like a slap in the face. While they had been fighting to save lives, Rigsby had been organizing his own protection detail. "This is a restricted area," Rigsby's voice carried over the roar of water. "You're all trespassing and interfering with emergency protocols." Linnea steadied herself against the wall, fury rising in her chest. Even now, with catastrophe unfolding around them, he was still trying to maintain control of the situation. "Emergency protocols?" she shouted back. "You mean like welding shut the safety valves? Or burning down my father's monitoring station to hide the evidence?" The security team moved forward, but Ranger positioned himself between them and Linnea's group, his hackles raised despite his injuries. The German shepherd's growl was barely audible over the dam's groaning, but his message was clear. "Those are baseless accusations," Rigsby said, straightening his expensive rain jacket. "This is clearly an attempt to create panic during a routine maintenance situation." The dam chose that moment to send another shudder through the structure. A massive crack spiderwebbed across the ceiling, sending chunks of concrete splashing into the rising water. One of the security guards stumbled backward, eyes wide with fear. "Routine?" Earl's voice carried a lifetime of bitterness. "Tell that to the thousands of people downstream who'll die when this dam fails. Tell them how you buried my reports for years while the pressure built up." Rigsby's carefully maintained facade began to crack. "You have no proof." "We have everything." Linnea stepped forward, her voice strong and clear despite the chaos. "The original engineering reports, photographs of the welded valves, documentation of every corner you cut to keep your profit margins high. Did you really think my father wouldn't keep records?" Another violent tremor rocked the gallery. A surge of water burst through a new crack in the wall, the powerful spray nearly knocking Rigsby off his feet. He stumbled backward, closer to a deep maintenance shaft now filling with swirling water. "Boss, we need to get out of here." One of the security guards was already backing toward the exit. "This whole place is coming apart." Rigsby's composure shattered completely. As the water rose around his expensive boots, all pretense of authority vanished. He turned and shoved past his own security team, scrambling toward higher ground without a backward glance at anyone else's safety. "That's right, run," Linnea called after him, her voice thick with disgust. "Just like you've been running from the truth all these years." The security team quickly followed their boss's example, disappearing up the maintenance passage and leaving them alone with the rising water and the groaning dam. Their retreat confirmed everything Earl had tried to warn people about: the corruption, the cowardice, the complete disregard for human life. "He'll probably try to blame us for the failure," Boone said grimly, supporting Earl as another tremor shook the structure. "Let him try," Linnea replied, her voice hard with determination. "We have the truth now, and this time everyone's going to hear it." The dam continued to roar around them, but Rigsby's departure had changed something. His flight confirmed every accusation, every warning that had been ignored. Whatever happened next, his corruption had been exposed for all to see. Water continued rising in the maintenance tunnels as Earl Crowder pressed his hand against the cold concrete wall, his weathered face deep in thought. The dam's groans echoed through the corridors like a dying beast. "There might be one way," he said finally, his voice barely audible above the chaos. The original design included an emergency channel on the east side. It was meant to divert overflow into the empty floodplain. Linnea steadied herself as another tremor shook the structure. "But that channel was never finished, was it?" "No." Earl's eyes took on a determined gleam. "But the basic structure is there. With properly placed charges, we could create a controlled break. The water would flow away from the towns, into uninhabited land." Boone stepped forward, already understanding. You're talking about demolition. In this? He gestured at the crumbling walls around them. The charges would need to be set in 3 key points. Earl pulled a worn notepad from his pocket, sketching quickly. Here, and here. The structural weak points that would direct the collapse. I'll do it, Boone said immediately. Just tell me where to place them. But Earl was already shaking his head. No, it has to be me. I designed the overflow system. I know every crack, every stress point in this dam. One mistake in placement, and will make things worse, not better. Linnea felt her heart constrict. She looked at her father, the man she'd thought abandoned them, who had instead spent years fighting alone to prevent this very disaster. The man she'd just found again. Dad, no, her voice cracked. The water's too high. The whole structure could go any minute. Earl took her hand, his grip still strong despite his injuries. That's exactly why it has to be now, and why it has to be me. Ranger whined, pressing against Earl's leg. The German Shepherd seemed to sense the weight of the moment. Listen to me, both of you, Earl continued. This isn't just about redemption. It's about doing what's right. What I should have done years ago instead of just documenting the problems. Another violent shudder ran through the dam. Chunks of ceiling splashed into the rising water. We don't have much time, Earl said urgently. The demolition supplies are in my old maintenance locker. I kept them for exactly this scenario. Linnea felt tears mixing with the spray on her face. Everything in her screamed to grab her father and drag him to safety. But she saw the truth in his eyes. This was his mission, his chance to finally protect the people he'd spent years trying to warn. The charges have to be placed in sequence, Earl explained quickly to Boone. Once they're set, you'll have 15 minutes to clear the area. Get as many people evacuated from downstream as you can. Boone nodded grimly, memorizing the diagram Earl had sketched. We'll need to alert emergency services, coordinate with... Already on it, Linnea cut in, pulling out her satellite phone. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. I'm calling everyone, federal, state, local. This time they'll have to listen. Earl squeezed her shoulder. That's my girl, always fighting the good fight. He looked at her with pride and regret mingled in his eyes. I'm sorry for all the years we lost, but maybe this way, I can finally be the father you deserved. Linnea threw her arms around him, holding tight for one precious moment. You already are, she whispered. Then Earl was moving, gathering the demolition supplies with practiced hands. Ranger stood at attention, clearly intending to accompany him. Keep him safe, Earl told Linnea, patting the dog's head one last time. He's earned his rest. But Ranger pulled away from Linnea's grasp, staying firmly by Earl's side. The old engineer smiled sadly. All right, old friend. One last mission together. Earl turned to Boone. 15 minutes after I signal. Not a second sooner. Get everyone clear of the floodplain. With a final look at his daughter, Earl Crowder headed into the depths of the failing dam, Ranger at his heels, carrying the tools that would either save thousands or seal their fate. The sound of rushing water gradually swallowed their footsteps, leaving Linnea torn between the desperate urge to follow and the knowledge that she had to trust her father one last time. Boone and Earl moved carefully through the flooding tunnels, their flashlight beams cutting through the murky darkness. The water reached their waists now, making each step treacherous. Here's the first point, Earl directed, his voice steady despite his injuries. They worked quickly to set the initial charges, Earl's experienced hands guiding Boone's stronger ones. Meanwhile, Linnea carried the injured Ranger up to the relay control room. The German Shepherd whimpered softly as she settled him near the control panel, but his eyes remained alert, watching her movements. "Second charge set," Boone's voice crackled through the radio. Suddenly, a massive surge of water swept through the tunnel. Boone lost his footing, nearly disappearing beneath the surface. "Hold on!" Earl shouted, bracing himself against a buckling bulkhead. He created just enough space for Boone to squeeze past the rushing water to safety. "Final charge in place," Earl's voice came through the radio, now distant and breaking up. "Linnea, it's time. You'll know when." The water rose relentlessly. Linnea's fingers hovered over the detonation controls, her heart pounding as she watched the pressure gauges climb into the red zone. She waited until the last possible moment, until the entire structure groaned with imminent failure. "I love you, Dad," she whispered, and pressed the button. The explosion rocked the entire valley, but the carefully placed charges worked exactly as Earl had planned. The massive wall of water diverted away from the populated areas, rushing instead through the uninhabited floodplain. Emergency sirens finally wailed across the downstream towns, triggering the evacuations that should have happened hours ago. Within days, federal investigators swarmed the dam site. They pored over Earl's meticulous documentation, interviewing former employees who now felt safe enough to come forward. Ranger's role as a courier became legendary. The loyal German shepherd who had carried truth through storm and darkness when all official channels failed. Colton Rigsby was led away in handcuffs, his corporate polish crumbling as agents read him his rights. Sheriff Lane held a brief press conference where he announced his resignation, unable to meet the townspeople's accusing stares. In the hospital, Linnea sat beside Earl's bed, holding his weathered hand. "I always wanted to tell you," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. "Everything I did was to protect people, to protect you." "I know that now, Dad," Linnea replied, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I understand." Earl managed a small smile before closing his eyes for the last time. Ranger pressed, his head against Linnea's leg as she wept, offering the same steadfast comfort he had shown through the entire crisis. Together, they would carry Earl's legacy of courage and truth forward. 3 weeks after the dam crisis, Linnea sat at her weathered kitchen table, staring at an official letter. The morning sun streamed through her windows, catching the steam from her coffee cup. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the offer again. Lead Safety Inspector for the Mississippi River System Authority. "They're finally listening," she said softly, as Ranger lifted his head from his bed in the corner. His injuries had healed well, leaving only a slight limp that the vet said would fade with time. Boone leaned against her counter, his steady presence as reassuring as always. "You earned this," he said, his voice warm with pride. "Every river mile, every fight to be heard, it all led here." Linnea reached down to scratch Ranger's ears as he patted over. The German shepherd pressed against her leg, his amber eyes bright and alert. She thought about how far they'd come, from a storm-tossed rescue to an unshakable bond. "We'll do this right," she said, looking up at Boone. His weathered face broke into a smile as he moved to stand beside her chair, his hand finding her shoulder. Their relationship had deepened through crisis into something solid and true, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The river outside her window flowed steady and strong, its waters carrying new meaning now. Where once her warnings had been dismissed, her voice would now help shape the future of the waterways she loved. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.